but also give your definition of what sales enablement actually is, because we're talking a lot about it today, but I'd love to hear maybe how you define that, and maybe if there's some differences between you as well. So Kate, we'll start with you.
Hi everybody, my name is Kate Philpott. I lead the sales enablement function at Getty Images. We have a sales organisation of about 500 people, so I guess on the larger scale of some of the organisations in this room, and I have a team of 7 people globally supporting sales enablement for our sales, customer success and customer service teams. Sales enablement, I think, means different things to different organisations, so I'm going to tell you what it means for us, which is providing the tools, the resources, be that content, be that training, be that coaching, all the way from hiring through to onboarding and developing both sellers and sales managers in order to serve our customers better. That means giving our customers more of what they need when they need it.
Brilliant, love that definition. Anything to add to that, Emily?
I mean, I love that definition, so well done. I had sales enablement at Summer, so to echo kind of Kate's intro, we're also roughly about 500 salespeople globally, but looking to rapidly expand, and we will likely be at about 2,500 within a year. So we have volume hiring needs, we have massive kind of scaling needs that we're looking into.
I'll trade you, that was scary.
And what I like about what you said, Kate, is that sales enablement is not limited to training and onboarding. I know we've talked a lot about training and onboarding in the sessions that I've overheard today, and the scope of that is really much broader. So what content, what resources are you providing? What type of insights are you providing? What tools to help processes along to really help people sell more and sell better?
All right. Ben?
Hi everyone, I'm Ben Samuels. I think probably why Tom wanted me on the panel is up until last month I was CRO at WeWork, so globally, so was there for the last 7.5 years. So I've seen many different cycles of hiring, restructuring, training, onboarding across many different segments. So we had quite a robust structure, a large consumer team, SMB, very big enterprise team, and then digital. So we had it broken up into 4, which made the business quite complex, especially sitting across 30 different countries. And it was all in aggregate of a team of about 600 people, so similar scale to everyone else on the panel. And really happy to be here to talk about enablement, because enablement reported into me, and it was a critical function, I think, for me, along with marketing, about just how to onboard, train, but then ongoing coaching and development. Super important for us. We've made a huge emphasis on career development, and one way to ensure your reps progress through their careers into different functions was to make sure they were supported all the way along, not only by their manager, but also by ongoing training, development, and coaching.
Great stuff. And you mentioned the word critical there. I'd love to just maybe get a show of hands from the audience about who has an enablement person or function in their business right now that's dedicated to enablement. Pop your hands in the air. It'd be good to see. Okay, not as many as I thought here at the Sales Enablement Summit, but that's great. And maybe just to break some myths and misconceptions about what sales enablement is, maybe just going down the line again, give us one common misconception or one misconception about sales enablement or sales performance more broadly.
I think, at the risk of being controversial, given where we are, I would say be wary of thinking that it can all be solved with technology.
Okay. And I definitely know a few sales leaders that just seem to buy a tool or a bit of tech stack every quarter, it seems. But okay, next to you.
Somewhat interestingly, I would say, don't assume that everything can be solved with training. So oftentimes when we see a dip in performance, sales managers tend to think, well, obviously they need more training. And that may or may not be the root cause of a dip or a drop in performance.
Love that, Emily. Ben, misconception for you?
I think they're both great points. I'm not sure I have a ton to add to that. But I do think, especially around performance, I think having your enablement team really tied to the commercials and the objectives of what we're trying to achieve. I think, in my experience, there have been some periods and phases where we had very theoretical enablement. It was all about models and structure, which is super important. But at the end of the day, our goal, we had to hit goal, and we needed to be practical and really specific to our different segment, whether it's consumer or enterprise, very different training, and practical about how we're going to help reps be able to articulate our value prop and get deals closed. So, of course, we had a separate track on general career development and professional development, but we did try to keep those a bit separate.
Right. I think we're going to dive into that in a bit more detail shortly, actually. So we're going to start by digging into hiring because getting high levels of sales performance obviously starts with getting the right salespeople through the door. So maybe starting with you, Kate, actually. So what are the most important qualities or characteristics that you look for or your company looks for in terms of salespeople that you're looking to hire?
Well, first thing is I would like us to live harder. There is a temptation, I think, sometimes on the part of managers to go for, they know the industry, therefore, as a proxy for, they'll be a half-decent salesperson. I would say that does not necessarily correlate. However, I made a list. And the reason I made a list is, it's all about, for me, behaviour and attitude, and that's, to do with your mindset. The rest of it, particularly for entry-level roles, I think as an organisation, we should be able to back ourselves to be able to train people. We'll tell you about getting images, we'll tell you about our content and how amazing it is. But when it comes to your mindset, it's a lot harder to teach that. So, drive for results, predictably, curiosity, a genuine interest in customers, and that curiosity piece, I bang on about this all the time with our sellers because we are not as good at asking questions as we should be. Going into sales calls with a whole bunch of assumptions about what you think your customer needs without actually validating that is a recipe for maybe one sale, but certainly not several. And therefore, enjoying solving customer problems, resilience, because you're not always going to get a yes, being self-starting, because your manager is not always there to hold your hand, to Tom's earlier point, being commercially savvy, so knowing the top and bottom of a spreadsheet is kind of helpful, and you'd be surprised how many people don't know how to do that. Being adaptable, because the one constant in most organisations these days is change. A growth mindset, a bit of a cliche, but it's still true. And being willing to be held accountable for both results, but also approach to getting those results.
Love that. That's great. And Ben, any qualities or characteristics that you look for when you're hiring? And how do you think about the importance of things like sector experience, as mentioned there by Kate, versus character traits?
Well, I think that was an amazing list, and I don't think I have that much to add to it. I will say there were a few things that we definitely emphasized. We were, especially in the early days when, I think we defined and represented hypergrowth in a way that most companies don't see. Our revenues, I think, doubled every year for 10 years, including going from $1 billion to $2 billion, $2 billion to $4 billion. So we were growing at a very, very rapid rate year over year. We made a huge number of mistakes in hiring, but I always found that resilience, absolutely key. Our business model was changing in real time. We were reacting to new markets, new directives. We had a CEO who often changed his mind and threw new things at us, and you had to be unbelievably resilient and grit. And I think our business, and like many other businesses, was probably a bit of a grind to get deals. It's a very manual process, to close real estate deals, office deals, a lot of negotiations, a lot of tours, a lot of hand-to-hand combat, as we called it. And so you needed people who could really just get behind it and were determined to see it through to the end. And that wasn't easy. And I think when we made a lot of mistakes in hiring in the boom days, there are people with great resumes. They came from incredible pedigree of companies, but when you put them in the firing line, they just folded because sales were easy where they had come from. They came from amazing platforms where deals just landed. And when the shit hit the fan, and it really did quite often, and things fell apart, I was just completely surprised by how many people just folded. And that we learned very quickly. We needed to test for that really early on.
So what I'm hearing here is things like sector experience, deal size experience, some of those other kind of skills that people might have noted on their CV are much less important in your view than those character traits of grit and resilience and kind of seeing things through. Anything you want to add to that, Emily?
No, I echo that. So I think skills and character perhaps more important than experience.
I think the one thing to add is, as you become more senior, so it depends on the level of the role, but as you're hiring for greater seniority, yes, you probably do want at least some sector experience, if not direct comparable business experience. But again, if I'm hiring a sales leader, I'm more bothered about their ability to lead. What I don't want is what I call a super rep. And we have had plenty of those over the years. I don't want somebody parachuting in and going, well, I can do that. Because actually what that means is you're disabling your sellers from doing the things that you're paying them to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Completely agree. So let's talk about kind of how do we assess some of these things then in the interview process? Because it's all fair and well saying you're looking for curiosity and coachability and grit, but then when it comes to assessing them, maybe Kate, you can give us some ideas of the methods that you would use to assess some of these traits.
Yeah, I think the first thing is obviously a bit to Benjamin's point, don't take the CV at face value. You know, I mean, honestly, anybody can write an amazing CV and make them sound like a complete superstar. The two most important things for me are beyond the initial screening. Number one, competence-based questions. And I don't particularly like hearing we, as in we did this, we did that. I want to know what you did, you specifically. And then the second thing, if you get past that stage, is what kind of practical exercise am I going to put into place that will actually test and give me confidence that this person can actually conduct a call when they come in and have to be put in front of customers. So we will do role play exercises where they have to come in, they do a discovery call, or they do a presentation, and then they have to be faced with some questions from the panel who will be role playing as a customer. And that is a great way of assessing whether what is on paper is actually backed up by practice.
I love that use of role play in the interview process. If anyone's read the Sales Acceleration Formula by Mark Roberge, who's the ex-CRO of HubSpot, he talks about actually testing for coachability in that stage of the process, because you get them to do the role play, you give them some feedback after that role play, you see how they internalize it and are they defensive, but then you get them to role play it again and see whether they actually were able to change what they did and improve it in some way. That's great. And then Ben, I know you are a big fan of kind of more case studies in the assessment process. Maybe talk about your process for assessing some of these traits and abilities in the interview.
Yeah, so just to touch on the resume thing again, I think it's important. What I like to do is you ask what problem did you solve, or what adversity did you go through, and how'd you get out of it. And on that, that's great. Someone will give you some broad-based answer, and then just keep asking, okay, and then what? And then what? And tell me more, and let's go deeper on that. And you'll know right away if they're reading just from a headline or if they actually did it. Just keep asking, okay, tell me more, then what happened? And you just be amazed how many people don't know the answer in full. And those who actually did the work and built the model and solved the problem can tell you every detail. And I think that's a really good litmus test. I think in our case, again, depending on the role you're hiring for, if we're talking about inbound SDRs on the consumer side, there's no case study, we just test for characteristics. When we were doing many large enterprise deals, and those deals would be anywhere from $5 to $50 million. So they were big deals, and the enterprise business ended up being 60% of our revenue, so $2.5 billion business on its own. And we needed to make sure that the reps who came in at the enterprise levels, especially senior ones, were what we call boardroom ready. They were able to, on their own, stand in front of or conduct a meeting with a room full of very senior people and be able to go deep on product knowledge. So we would run a case study very specifically on, the head of real estate and CFO of HSBC, that lease coming up. You want to sell, your office space at Waterloo. It's a $25 million deal. How are you going to present it? What challenges? What are the benefits? And then I'm going to ask you a ton of questions. And even if the answers weren't right, who cares, because we can teach that. It's how they stood up to the pressure. If they were going to be on their own, what would their reaction be if they got the tough questions? And I think you learned a lot. One, about presentation skills, analytical skills, and then again, maybe it's resilience, just powering through the really awkward moments.
That's great. Anything you do to test for curiosity? Because you mentioned that, Kate, and I'm a big fan of curiosity as well. So any ideas or thoughts around testing for that in the interview process? I appreciate I've gone off script a bit here, but I'm just keen to hear your thoughts.
Well, I like a discovery call as a role play. That's a great way of assessing whether people will default to a bunch of closed questions that will get one-word answers, or whether they nest all their questions that again come from a place of assumption. But then the other part of curiosity is I will always leave time at the end of the interview for the candidate to ask me questions. And I find that to be incredibly revealing. I interviewed somebody on Monday who went, no.
Not a good sign.
Yeah, no, really not a good sign. What do you mean you've not got any questions? You want somebody who is interested in your organisation, who has taken the time to do a bit of research, has at least found out who the board is, or who's on the global leadership team, or what was their most recent big win, and has some real desire to join the business. And the question should back that up. And as I say, if they don't, then chances are they're just doing the kind of scattergun and throwing of their CV at many walls.
Great answer. So we talked a bit about hiring and making sure we're assessing for the right characteristics and traits. So once we've hired them, obviously the next stage of making them productive and hopefully achieving high sales performance is onboarding. We talked about it a lot. Great presentation from Tom as well, I thought. Maybe back to you, Emily. So once you've hired the right candidate, what specific onboarding frameworks or methodologies are you typically using to make sure that they're up to speed and ready to be productive and ramp quickly?
Yeah, so ramping quickly is obviously top priority, probably in every company. In terms of the framework and how you're training, that is going to vary depending on the role that you're hiring for and the company that you're in. But to echo what Ben was saying earlier, I think the most important thing about how you are structuring your training and onboarding is, let's say, metrics and KPIs that you're tying it to. So I have been at companies, I have been the trainee and the trainer, where you see, I can't remember if it was Tom that was referencing it, a series of shadowing other salespeople and presentations, and you're reading through PDF documents, and then you're in the role. And nobody has actually validated whether what you've shadowed was appropriate, if they're the behaviors or habits that you want them to be copying, if they've absorbed the material from whatever documents you shared with them. So to be able to tie your training and onboarding efforts to a real business-driven metric, whatever that may be, is crucial to align your efforts. Also, having a way to assess that. So by my own definition, I think that training should result in a change in behavior. It's not about asking them to memorize all the product details. I can't remember, there's a gentleman there from a pharmaceutical company saying, oh, we've got all these very complex products and offerings and details. I'm sure that, involve regulations and everything. The purpose is not that your sales reps memorize all of that, but maybe you want to teach them about resourcefulness. Do they know where to find the information when they need it? Do they know how to interpret it? So make sure that you're baking in at least 2 forms of assessment, one being either a mock call or a case study like you would do in an interview, so assess those behaviors and abilities in some sort of mock scenario, and then on the job. So don't just do a mock scenario or a quiz or an exam and say, great, they got 85%, looks like they can do the role. You need to have further validation once they are starting, whatever it is. Are they presenting in front of a room full of high execs? Are they qualifying calls? Whatever it is, make sure that you're assessing how they actually exhibit those behaviors in a real life scenario.
That's great. And you mentioned there kind of making sure they're absorbing the information that they're given in onboarding. Maybe Kate, you can give us a feel for how you assess whether they are properly absorbing information in that onboarding phase, that they are actually retaining what they're being taught.
Yeah, so on onboarding for us, it is a lot about knowledge checking, and we do that in an informal way, we do that in a formal way. I think a really important piece around building your onboarding program, whatever it is that it is done in partnership with the sales leadership. It is not just the job of sales enablement or whether you've got an enterprise enablement team as well, to onboard and bring your new hires up to speed. The sales managers play a part. And it is the bane of my life that some of our sales managers think that we can just hand over somebody ready and able to hit the ground sprinting 2 weeks after they've gone through our part of onboarding without any intervention from them. So the kind of things that we rely on sales managers to do are to set up things like call shadowing, but with a very specific remit. In this call, you are going to look for the following 5 things. Tomorrow, we'll talk about those 5 things, and then we're going to talk about what that will then look like when you put it into practice. So it's helping to join the dots so that your new hires walk away with a really clear understanding of what's expected. But then, we do a lot of knowledge checking, and we do it to a standard. So if you don't meet the standard, you go back and do the training again, because clearly you weren't listening. Or maybe we didn't shape the learning in the right way, and we didn't deliver the messages in a way that was easy to absorb. So there's a lot of iteration, and I think something that my team and I have really realised of late is you cannot rely on saying something once and it's sticking. We're having to iterate and reiterate a surprisingly large number of times before some information actually sticks in people's heads. And I get it, it is way more complex now than when I was in sales. There is so much information that is being thrown at sellers, and it is, to Emily's point, wholly unrealistic to think that people are going to keep all of that information in their heads. It's just not.
And Ben, any kind of assessments or checkpoints that you would have in place before you kind of release them from onboarding and say, yeah, tick, they're ready to be operational?
So we do have a series at WeWork of certifications. So people, and it's not only new hires, we have ongoing product evolutions and new product launches, and we want everyone to be certified. So they'll have to do a pitch session either with their manager or someone from the enablement team or the head of the product, depending on what it is. And so usually it's a 20 to 30 minute pitch where they get grilled. It's a bit manual, it's hard to do at scale. We have technology that's helping us do that much more efficiently now with feedback and coaching that doesn't require the manager, but they can look at the highlights of it. The manager can then see the report about how it went. But we do, if people fail, they need to go back and learn it again and understand why they didn't get it. But I think those assessments along the way, those certifications are great. They're really important, and it keeps the pressure on, but it also keeps the quality high.
And Emily, anything that you do specifically around assessments in terms of quantifying objectively that they've achieved a certain level?
Yeah, I mean, we have a framework that we use. It's developed and specific to the business, but quite easy to recreate. So what you would need to do is figure out what are your sales teams primarily being, targeted on. So whether it's recurring monthly revenue, whether it's, profit generated or anything like that. And do your sales managers and existing sales teams understand what the leading indicators are to achieve those results? So it's all well and good to say, hey, you've got a target of whatever it is. I don't know what your targets are, but 800 million per month. And then say, hey, you've missed your target, do better next time. That's not very helpful, right? So understanding what are the steps in your sales methodology, your process, the behaviors or characteristics you're looking out for, and having a way to assess that, even if it's as simple as like a stoplight. Hey, green, they did great, yellow, it was kind of an okay answer, and red, it was terrible. That will give you an indication of future performance, right? If you've tied those in appropriately. What I would also add is, and I think to Kate's point, if someone is failing their training or their onboarding, yes, it could be because they're not a right fit or they weren't paying attention, but you also need to bake in the ability for you to go back and reevaluate how you're training. So if any of you use systems where you are going through like a multiple choice quiz or exam as part of your assessments, take a look at where is everybody failing a particular question, where is everybody succeeding on a question. Both of those are probably not very useful, right? And if everybody's failing, you likely have not trained appropriately on it, and you need to revise what you're doing.
That's great.
I think just one on that failing question thing. I think the other thing is sometimes we don't write the questions well enough. We operate in 14 different countries, and so we've got a lot of our sellers who aren't native English speakers. And it's really easy to assume that everybody gets it, and oftentimes the feedback we get is that makes no sense, or it made no sense to me. And so there is that kind of second set of eyes on just how well and how clearly written is this question. Is it easy for me to answer, or do actually I first have to work out what it is that you want from me before I provide the answer? And actually that's been really helpful in kind of analysing where sometimes we've not really.
I love that you're taking responsibility for that and trying to improve it as well. So Emily, you talked about data points earlier and kind of leading and lagging indicators. Can you give us a sense of what metrics or data points are important to be tracking during that onboarding phase? And also, how do you think about leading versus lagging indicators?
Yeah, sure. I'm a huge fan of lead versus lag measures, and for those of you who aren't familiar with it, I'm happy to give my favorite analogy, which is my ever ongoing desire to lose weight. So a lag measure would be thanks, stepping on the scales and saying, oh, I've gained 2 pounds or I've lost 1 pound, and then going about the next week doing exactly the same things. That lag measure of the number on the scale tells me nothing about my efforts towards trying to lose weight, which is why it's not working. So what you need to be looking at is what behaviors actually impact that lag measure or that outcome. So in that scenario, probably my caloric intake or how much exercise I'm doing. So when you're training and when you're building your onboarding, you don't want to be focused on, hey everybody, this is the number on the scale, or this is the revenue generated, because they can't directly impact that. What you want to focus on is how are you building out a plan that is training them on measuring their calories or training them how to exercise. So in sales, what are those metrics that you're looking at for your SDRs, your BDRs, your AEs, AMs, whatever the role is? And do you have a clear understanding from within your sales team of what behaviors impact those outcomes? And those are the metrics you're looking at. Those are the behaviors you're training on. So an SDR, just to give random examples, but probably the number of calls they're making in a day is going to impact how many leads they convert. The time they're spending on follow-ups will impact the number of leads they convert. That's what you're looking at.
Makes sense. Anything you'd add to that, Kate? In terms of metrics or leading and lagging indicators?
No, I mean, I think in a lot of businesses, predictably, there is a lot of focus on the lagging indicators, and from our perspective, it's much more about, well, what are the behaviours, what are the inputs that will help you to get there. I don't think I've really got anything.
Well, I think it's a really good segue into the next bit of this discussion, which is, okay, we've hired the great people, we've onboarded them really well. How do we maintain that ongoing performance, and how do we kind of enable them in the role that we talked about, the importance of some of those leading indicators, some of those key metrics. But I think there's often a debate about how to balance, I suppose, strict KPIs and metrics that you give to reps versus giving them more autonomy and more creativity in terms of how they perform in the role. Ben, maybe you can give us a sense as to how you strike that balance between kind of dictating what needs to be done, whether it be calls per day or meetings per week, versus giving them ownership over that.
Yeah, no, and it's a tricky balance because you want to hire people who are creative, who are independent thinkers, and who can go and hit goal, right, and in their own way. Everyone's got a slightly different style. Where I think we landed was there are a set of KPIs, set of behaviors that get us to goal, get us to revenue. We know what they are reasonably scientifically. And so what we do is we don't pay people on KPIs, but we do celebrate leaderboards, KPIs every week. Every Monday we have a global sales call, and we go through hot topics and things like that. What's happening, where we need to focus. But then we also celebrate and we rotate the leaderboards, and we say, okay, this week on this particular KPI, here are the top 10 performers, or top 20. We celebrate it, we call them out, and the emojis are flying all over the Zoom call, and everyone's like really excited. But you don't want to find yourself outside the top 20 and missing goal, right? If you're outside the top 20 but you're smashing goal, well, you've clearly found the secret formula. That's great. We should dig into that and find out how everyone else can do it. But otherwise, I think there are 5 or 6 things that everyone should be doing. And we do coach to them, but we don't pay on them. And I think that's worked really well. So we focus on them, we highlight them, we celebrate them, but we don't mandate that people do them.
Love it. Anything you'd add, Kate?
Well, actually, we have started incentivising against a couple of core inputs. So number one is account planning, which probably a lot of you makes you think, well, wait, what, you didn't have account plans before? No, we didn't. Or at least we didn't have in a consistent way. So sometimes they were on people's notepads, sometimes they were on an Excel, and now they're all in one place, Salesforce, which is where they should be. So if you're not doing your account plans, that's an issue. If you're not doing your account plans and you're hitting your numbers, maybe slightly less of an issue, but it's still an issue. If you are doing your account plans and not hitting your numbers, well, then we'll get into, okay, well, you probably will eventually, and what else do we need to do to support you? And then the second thing is being willing to, per growth mindset, engage in our program of coaching. That we're going to move on to. A resistance to being coached, no matter at what level you are in your organisation, is a massive red flag to me. And it is now to our sales leadership who have totally come on board with the idea that coaching is a real imperative. Bit to Emily's point, you can do all the training that you like, but that will not necessarily guarantee behaviour change. It's when you get into the coaching on the job that you get to understand what are the reasons why this training is not being put into practice.
Emily, go on.
Can I add to that? So I like what you're saying about a resistance to being coached is a red flag. I would also add that a resistance to coaching is a red flag. So we expect that our sales managers play a role in coaching reps. And what I have noticed on a couple of occasions is a manager saying, well, X rep is actually performing exceptionally well month over month and therefore doesn't need coaching. If Olympians need coaching, the top race car drivers in the world need coaching. No matter what level you are at, you need coaching. So if a manager can't recognize where they can coach, that's a flag, because perhaps they're not at the right level to do that.
Really good point. Just off script a little bit, but I'd love to maybe break down kind of what the difference is in your mind between coaching, training and feedback? Like, anyone got a view on like, how those things, because we throw this term coaching around a lot, I think, in sales, but I don't think people necessarily really understand what does that actually mean? What does coaching mean? So maybe, can we help demystify that a bit?
Well, I can try. I mean, we've literally spent the last couple of years, to Emily's point, training our managers to be better at coaching. And again, a lot of instance people, well, I know for a fact, they were conflating giving feedback with giving coaching. So giving feedback is, here's where you went wrong, simply put. Coaching is, where do you think you went wrong? Or what went well? What just happened? What were your goals for that call? What stopped you achieving your goals? What got in the way? What are you going to do differently next time? What it does is it builds accountability on the part of the coachee, rather than, as the manager, a bit to Tom's earlier point, being the constant source of answers. That actually, all that you do as a result of that is create dependence. So that person is going to sit on their hands and they are going to continually come back to you and go, I don't know what the answer is. Now, you know, as your sales team scale, that becomes completely untenable. You need to, we collectively, and certainly in our business, have had to try to create a greater level of independence of thought. And the only way you can do that is through coaching. What was the other bit?
No, that was just a brilliant answer. I don't think we need to go anywhere from after that, Kate. That was great. So Emily, maybe give us a sense of what role ongoing coaching plays within your org.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about coaching, but I'd also like to talk about enablement in that mix. So you mentioned training, feedback, and coaching, but we haven't talked about enablement, which to me I think is a bit of a fourth pillar there. So one really nice outcome from having an appropriate training onboarding program, which has quite clear assessments built in, and we were talking about both mock scenarios and let's say on the job, is that you have a really clear idea of every single person who has gone through the program and what their competencies are, and if they were able to, let's say, apply whatever you had taught them, which is a saving grace by the time you get to performance issues, coaching, etc. Because back to my original point about managers saying, oh, they need more training, you have something on paper that says, no, actually, I know that Kate's gone through this training. I validated that she not only understood this concept but can apply it. We have a different issue. And what is that issue? Is she lacking motivation? Is she, not prioritizing her time appropriately? Do we have a process in place that doesn't make sense and it's taking her 87 clicks in Salesforce to create a quote and her sales cycle is off the charts? It gives you that ability to look into what else is affecting the ability to sell. Because it's not just some, competencies that you've trained on. So I think coaching comes into play there, where perhaps it's not a trained skill, but to Kate's point, what's their ability to problem solve like? Can I help them figure out how to better prioritize their time and their tasks? Where do I need to focus to improve this overall? And I would also say that coaching to me is a very one-on-one, let's say, resolution versus widespread issues in a team. So if you see that, hey, we're October and all of a sudden sales this month are plummeting versus last month, it's highly unlikely that your entire sales team all of a sudden sucks in October, right? It's probably something else that's going on and you need to figure out what that is. However, if it's one person who is really dragging down the team, well, that person likely needs coaching.
Love that. And we're touching now on kind of performance management and diagnosing what the root cause is of underperformance. It was staggering to me. I looked at the Pavilion data earlier this year with Ebster, and only 20% of reps are currently hitting quota, apparently, in 2024, which is, I'm sure there's some businesses that are doing way better than that, but that was kind of like, wow, what's going wrong? Ben, how do you think about kind of diagnosing and addressing performance issues within the sales team?
So that 20% stat is terrifying. It's not anything that I've seen, luckily. But I would say that we're very, very clear when we hire that we have a very high standard and very high performance culture. And people, we're a great fun culture and we're supportive, and it's a really young, dynamic team in general, but everyone's got a hiccup. We're just really clear in the beginning. And if you don't, we will support you and we will have feedback discussions and we'll coach. But at the end of the day, there's a high benchmark, and if it doesn't work, you're not going to be able to stay here. So we do look at ongoing, regular rankings, tables, people hitting, and those who are underperforming, we will obviously have a conversation. We will provide coaching, support and try to get them back on track. In many cases, it works quite well. And where it doesn't, then we have a formal process to put them on a PIP, which is a performance improvement plan, and we're very clear on what we need to see in 3 months, and if it doesn't work, at the end of that, they need to leave. So in the US, it's a little bit more employment at will, so you can move much more quickly. I'd say other places you need to go through a very clear documented performance process. It takes longer, but it's a worthwhile process, and we try to do it almost whenever we can. But it's structured, it's clear, we tell people this is what will happen, and it does.
And what about you both? How do you manage underperformance specifically? Do you turn to the performance improvement plan? Give us a sense as to how you wrap your arms around, that individual and try and course correct them, because most PIPs that I see end up with an exit, and I see very few that turn around that actually end up with that person staying in the business. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure. Yes, we do use the performance improvement plans. Interestingly, I've seen whenever you hear PIP mentioned, it is met with such resistance and defensiveness because it's seen as a punishment. So I think there's a lot of work to be done across every organization to shift that. And getting a people team or an HR team involved increases the stress level and the temperature of that employee who may be trying hard and is still underachieving. So that's kind of the first table stakes. The second thing that I've noticed about PIPs is that occasionally the expectations are very clear, but the path to achieve those expectations is not. So you'll say, okay, you have 3 months in order to get to 95% of your target, otherwise you're out. With very little helpful support in helping an employee get there. So having clear action plans, having a clear accountability, not just from the individual, but also from a training and enablement team and from their manager. Very, very clearly stating, here is what you need to do. You need to make 10 calls a day. I will sit with you for 5 minutes at the end of every day and make sure that you have done that. We'll talk about any struggles or objections you've hit. Let's talk about what you can do to improve that. But they need to understand the behaviors that they can control and they can do in order to achieve it. If you're training appropriately and coaching appropriately, in fact, I have seen quite good success in PIPs. Yeah, the only time where it doesn't work is when there's an attitude issue, and then we're back to the hiring. Have you hired the right character?
Kate, anything you want to add to that?
Well, I would agree. I think sometimes we do have square pegs in round holes, and it's important to acknowledge that as soon as humanly possible. I think we've got a reasonably good record in saving. I mean, I guess the clue's in the title. It's a performance improvement plan. So hopefully, in more cases than not, you do see improvement. I absolutely agree with Benjamin. It's also then about really clear, documented expectations, and then being prepared to follow through, because there is nothing worse, and I've seen this happen, where there's a managerial crying wolf. You have got to be prepared to follow through, whichever the consequences. You either stay, you don't stay. And then the final thing, going back to coaching, which I'm increasingly encouraging managers to get into, is what makes you happy? What is it about this job that makes you bounce out of bed in the morning? Because to your point, if current conversion rates are 20%, that means it's pretty tough out there. And if you are not loving that, or at least liking it, or at least thinking this is an opportunity that I'm going to rise to, then you may well be in the wrong job. And you're not doing anybody a service by encouraging them to stay in the job that they hate.
I love that. It reminds me actually back to a role I was the CRO a few years ago, and I inherited this sales team of underperforming reps who had their quota jacked up kind of every couple of months, and they were feeling like it was just impossible to hit this quota. And what I realized is that no one had really asked them the question, like, what are they motivated by, and why do they want to be there, and what gets them out of bed in the morning? And we went through this kind of probably a couple of quarters transformation where we embedded a coaching approach into the managers, my middle managers, and we actually ended up removing all of their quotas. Can you believe this? A sales leader removing quotas from sales reps. But the reason why we succeeded and we turned the performance around is because we tapped into the intrinsic motivators of why they were there, what they wanted to achieve and do in their career, and actually then we supported them as a coach, not as a kind of, using KPIs and metrics as a stick to beat them with or quota to beat them with. So I love this idea of embracing coaching, and I think that's probably where we're going to move on to our final wrap-up question, where I'm going to ask each of you just to share one key strategy or approach that has made the biggest impact in improving sales performance that you've seen? So kind of one big takeaway, the big thing that's had the biggest impact on improving sales performance. And we'll start with you, Kate.
Well, I guess based on what I've said so far, you'd be unsurprised to hear me say coaching. I think it's really, I mean, I've been in sales a really long time, and I started probably 20 plus years ago in what was then called FMCG, and the company that I worked for, which was Mars at the time, was obsessed with on-the-job coaching. It was what managers were measured on, and I haven't forgotten it. And I think we have over the years lost sight of the value of that. You can manage the KPIs. It's really important to manage the KPIs, and of course to hitting revenue. But if you don't understand what makes your people successful, number one, if you don't yourself have a really good understanding of what success looks like, then how can you help develop your people? And as a people leader, it is literally your job to develop your people. Whether it's sales, whether it's marketing, doesn't matter the function, and this is why I say sometimes I think sales leaders in particular get caught up in being super rep. And I think sometimes it kind of helps to feel a bit of an ego boost by being super rep, but it doesn't help their people. And that for me is one of the most important things.
Completely agree. Emily?
My biggest learning over the past few years was really tying in that onboarding and training to business success metrics and testing for that on the job before, say, handing them off to sales. When you don't have that really clear tie-in, you end up with a really disjointed experience where you are training reps on something that likely isn't reflective of their on-the-job experience.
Great. And Ben, final word from you on biggest thing to improve sales performance.
So it's going to be a little bit high level, but I would call it revenue architecture. I think when the legacy of us in hypergrowth is people's roles were just very confusing. I don't think we defined them very well. People were tripping over each other. There was a lot of friction in the system, and everyone was getting paid because we were just hitting lots of revenue targets. I don't think people really knew what their job was. So when we took the moment of during COVID, when things quieted down a little bit, and obviously a big point of stress for us, to restructure and re-architect everything. We had the moment to do it. We didn't want to waste the crisis, and once we aligned what our divisions were, what people's roles were, what their North Stars were individually and as a team, we actually took the sales team down by about half and did more revenue. So the efficiency went through the roof, people's happiness went through the roof, clarity of what their goals were. It sounds obvious, but was really important to empower those to go and do it, right? And then the managers knew what to do. They had their teams, and we suddenly ended up in a much better place than we'd ever been. And that was a big shift, and we had to redefine and re-educate.
Nice.